Dr. Liam Thorne stood in the ceremonial chamber of the Valestrian royal palace, trying to maintain diplomatic composure while his internal state oscillated between anxiety and resignation. The chamber was magnificent, soaring architecture that combined organic curves with crystalline elements, bioluminescent patterns in the walls that shifted in response to the occupant's collective emotional state, space designed to hold hundreds of witnesses for significant social events. Today it held perhaps 70 Valestrians, nobles, advisors, family representatives, and members of the Queen's court, all watching him with expressions ranging from curiosity to calculation, to barely concealed anticipation for whatever drama was about to unfold. But the primary focus was on the 5 Valestrian women positioned in a formal semicircle before him, each representing different factions, families, and political interests within the complex hierarchy of Valestrian society. This entire situation had spiraled far beyond anything Liam had anticipated when he'd arrived 6 months ago, as part of a human cultural exchange program designed to strengthen diplomatic relations between Earth and the Valestrian sovereignty. The Valestrians were an impressive species by any measure, tall, averaging close to 2 meters, with elegant proportions and movements that suggested both strength and grace. Their skin displayed subtle bioluminescent patterns that shifted with emotional state and social signaling, creating a visual layer of communication that human observers found beautiful but difficult to fully interpret. Their culture was ancient, sophisticated, and built on intricate webs of alliance, obligation, and honor that made Earth's most complex political systems seem straightforward by comparison. Liam had been assigned to study Valestrian marriage customs and bonding practices as part of his anthropological research focus. It was supposed to be purely observational work, attending public ceremonies, interviewing willing participants, documenting the elaborate social protocols surrounding courtship and partnership formation. But somewhere along the way, his presence at various courtship ceremonies and bonding rituals had been misinterpreted, or perhaps deliberately reinterpreted by certain factions who saw opportunity in the presence of Earth's cultural representative. His attendance at ceremonies had been taken as indication of his own availability and interest. His academic questions about bonding practices had been read as personal inquiries about how to navigate courtship. His professional courtesy had been mistaken for, or strategically framed as, romantic interest. By the time Liam realized what was happening, multiple high-status Valestrian women had publicly expressed interest in forming bonds with him. And in Valestrian culture, once such interest was publicly declared, it created social obligations that couldn't be simply ignored or declined without significant consequence. The Valestrians practiced what they called choice ceremony, when multiple potential partners had expressed interest in the same individual. The interested parties would present themselves formally, make their cases, and the one being courted would make a public declaration of choice. It was meant to be clear and definitive, preventing ongoing rivalry and establishing social hierarchy among the rejected parties based on how they handled the refusal with grace or bitterness. Liam had tried repeatedly over the past months to clarify that he wasn't actually seeking a Valestrian partner, that his presence at ceremonies had been professional observation rather than personal participation. But his protests had been interpreted as appropriate modesty or perhaps strategic ambiguity, playing the field before making a selection, maintaining negotiating leverage by not committing too early. The situation had escalated to the point where the Queen herself had decreed that Liam must participate in a formal choice ceremony. To resolve the mounting tensions, his apparent indecision was creating among the interested parties and their families. Now he stood in the ceremonial chamber, required to make a choice he didn't want to make, facing 5 women whose motivations and expectations he only partially understood. Lady Serath stood at the center of the 5, the most prominent and by most measures the most desirable option available to him. She was beautiful by Valestrian standards, with perfectly maintained bioluminescent patterns and the kind of bearing that indicated high social status from birth. Politically powerful as daughter of a high council member who controlled significant resources and influence. She had been the most persistent in her attention toward Liam, arranging opportunities for interaction, making her interest clear through elaborate social signaling, and treating his eventual choice of her as essentially inevitable. She was also, from what Liam had observed over months of interaction, intensely jealous and possessive. She had made her contempt for the other interested parties clear through subtle but unmistakable social maneuvers designed to undermine their status and make herself appear as the only rational choice. To Serath's right stood Thesha, a military officer whose interest in Liam seemed based partly on genuine connection. They'd had several engaging conversations about comparative military history and the ethics of defensive warfare, and partly on the political advantage that bonding with Earth's cultural representative would provide for her family's faction within Valestrian society. Next was Velara, a scholar and researcher, whose motivations appeared most similar to Liam's own academic interests. She had approached the possibility of bonding as primarily an opportunity for collaborative research on cross-species relationships and comparative psychology. Her interest felt more intellectual than romantic, which was perhaps the most comfortable option for Liam, but also raised questions about what kind of bond would actually be formed. Then Catherine, daughter of a prominent merchant family, whose interest was transparently about the trade advantages that connection to Earth's representative would provide. She had been very direct about the mutual benefits such a bond could create, which Liam appreciated for its honesty, even as it made clear that her interest was primarily transactional. And finally Nissa, who was young, perhaps equivalent to human early 20s, and who seemed genuinely infatuated with Liam in ways that made him deeply uncomfortable. She appeared to have romanticized him without really knowing him as a person, building an idealized image based on his exotic status as a human, rather than on actual understanding of his character or compatibility. Liam didn't want to choose any of them. He respected several of them as individuals. He'd enjoyed conversations with Thesha and Velara. He appreciated Catherine's directness. He felt sympathy for Nissa's obvious but misguided feelings. But he wasn't romantically interested in forming a permanent bond with any Valestrian woman. The entire situation felt like being caught in a social mechanism that didn't have an off switch or an exit that wouldn't cause significant offense. He tried explaining this to the Queen's advisor, a Valestrian named Serath who served as cultural liaison for diplomatic matters. "I understand your discomfort," Serath had said with what seemed like genuine sympathy. "But you must understand the situation from our perspective. Multiple high-status women have publicly expressed interest in bonding with you. Their families have invested social capital in these claims. If you refuse to choose at all, you insult all of them simultaneously and their families. This could destabilize carefully maintained political alliances and create significant diplomatic tension between our species. So I'm required to form a bond. I don't want to prevent political problems." Liam had asked. "You are required to make a choice within the framework our culture provides for these situations. Whether that choice leads to an actual bond or to a more formal partnership arrangement can be negotiated after the ceremony. But you must choose, even if that choice is difficult or based on considerations other than romantic feeling." So here Liam stood, boxed into a corner by cultural protocols he'd inadvertently triggered, surrounded by witnesses waiting to see which Valestrian woman the human would select and how the rejected parties would respond. The ceremony had formal protocols that Liam had been carefully instructed in over the past week. Each interested party would make a brief formal statement about why they sought the bond. Then Liam was expected to respond to each in turn before making his final declaration of choice. It was meant to be dignified and respectful, though Liam's research had shown him that these ceremonies could sometimes become tense or even confrontational when jealousy or political stakes were particularly high. The chamber fell absolutely silent as the Queen's ceremonial advisor stepped forward to formally open the proceedings. Liam took a deep breath, trying to prepare himself for whatever came next. He'd spent the past week trying to calculate which choice would cause the least harm, which political alliance would be most beneficial for Earth's interests, which of these women might be least hurt by being selected for pragmatic rather than romantic reasons. But all his calculations had led to the same uncomfortable conclusion. There was no good choice available within the framework the Valestrians were offering him. He could only hope that whatever he said in the next minutes would navigate the situation without causing too much damage to anyone involved, including himself. The ceremonial advisor spoke in formal Valestrian, which Liam's translation implant rendered into standard. We gather to witness the choice ceremony of Liam Thorne, representative of Earth, in response to the bond claims of 5 women of status. Let each claimant speak their case, then let the choice be declared with clarity and honor. The 5 women stood ready, their bioluminescent patterns displaying various configurations that Liam had learned to associate with anticipation, confidence, anxiety, determination, and hope. The ceremony was beginning, and Liam still had no idea what he was going to say. Lady Serath stepped forward first, as was her right based on her superior social status. Her bioluminescent patterns displayed configurations that Liam had learned to recognize as confidence bordering on arrogance, deep blues and silvers that apparently communicated self-assurance and expectation of favorable outcome. Liam Thorne of Earth, she said, her voice carrying clearly across the chamber despite not being particularly loud. I offer bond claim on behalf of my family and myself. You have been welcomed into our highest social circles. You have been granted access and respect beyond what most outsiders receive in a lifetime of residence. You have observed our finest traditions and customs. She paused, her patterns shifting subtly. I am considered the most desirable match among my generation by measures of beauty, status, family position, and social influence. My choice to pursue bond with you brings honor to your position here and opens possibilities for advancement and integration that would otherwise be closed to you. The logic of choosing me is evident to anyone with understanding of how our society functions. Her tone made absolutely clear that she expected acceptance, that she viewed his choice of her as essentially predetermined by rational assessment of advantage and appropriate social hierarchy. The other 4 women stood rigid, their patterns showing varying degrees of tension. Thesha's military discipline kept her expression controlled, but her patterns flickered with what might have been frustration or resignation. Velara looked thoughtful, perhaps already calculating whether she'd been correct to participate in a ceremony where political considerations might outweigh intellectual compatibility. Catherine appeared calculatingly observant, as if taking notes on effective and ineffective approaches. Nissa's patterns showed colors that Liam's limited knowledge associated with distress and diminishing hope. Thesha stepped forward next, her bearing precisely military despite wearing formal ceremonial attire rather than uniform. Liam Thorne, she said, her voice carrying the measured cadence of someone accustomed to giving orders and reports. I offer bond claim based on respect and compatible purpose. We have spoken extensively of honor, duty, and the weight of representing our peoples in contexts where mistakes have consequences beyond ourselves. I believe we understand each other in ways that create foundation for strong partnership built on mutual respect and shared values. She paused. I do not claim to offer the highest social status or the greatest political advantage, but I offer partnership of equals who face similar challenges and carry similar responsibilities. That has value that transcends political calculation. Velara's turn came next. The scholar approached her statement with the same analytical precision, she apparently brought to her research. I offer bond claim built on shared intellectual curiosity and pursuit of knowledge. Our conversations about comparative culture, evolutionary psychology, and the challenges of cross-species communication have been among the most stimulating of my career. Together, we could contribute significantly to understanding between our species, producing research that would benefit both our peoples. This is partnership with clear purpose and mutual interest in discovery, rather than merely social or political arrangement. Catherine was direct and pragmatic in her approach. I offer bond claim that would benefit both our interests through clear mutual advantage. Your connection to Earth's trade networks and diplomatic channels, combined with my family's commercial position and resources here, would create opportunities profitable to both sides. I am not offering romance, but I am offering honest partnership based on complementary interests and transparent goals. Sometimes clarity about mutual benefit creates stronger foundation than vague promises of emotional connection. Nissa was last, and her statement carried emotional weight that the others had avoided or downplayed. I offer bond claim from genuine feeling rather than calculation. You are unlike anyone I have known, kind when our culture sometimes values strength more than kindness, thoughtful when quick decisions are praised, curious about things others take for granted. You make me feel seen and valued in ways I have never experienced. I know I am young and perhaps foolish by others' standards. I know I cannot offer the political advantages or status that others can. But my heart has chosen you whether wisdom approves or not, and I offer that honestly even if it seems naive. The 5 women stood before him, having made their cases according to ceremony protocol. Liam could feel the weight of expectation from the watching audience, could see the queen observing with careful attention from her elevated position, could sense that what he said next would have consequences extending far beyond this moment. The ceremonial advisor spoke. The claimants have presented their cases. Liam Thorne of Earth, you will now respond to each claim before making your final choice declaration. Liam opened his mouth to begin his carefully prepared diplomatic responses, but before he could speak, Lady Serath stepped forward again, a clear violation of protocol that made several witnesses gasp audibly. There is no need for extended consideration or political responses to each claim, she said, her patterns flashing through colors that indicated anger barely controlled beneath formal courtesy. The appropriate choice is obvious to anyone with rational understanding of status, advantage, and social hierarchy. I am the superior option by every measure that matters: family position, political influence, social status, physical beauty by our standards. The others should withdraw their claims and accept reality with grace. Thesha's hand moved instinctively toward where her weapon would normally be holstered, though she was unarmed in this ceremonial context. Her patterns flashed through military alert colors. You overreach, Serath. The choice is not yours to make or dictate. The ceremony has protocols. And yet the outcome is obvious, Serath interrupted, her patterns now showing open contempt. Unless, of course, the human is too foolish or too blinded by false sentiment to recognize what serves his interests best. But I trust he is more intelligent than that. The tension in the chamber spiked dramatically. This kind of confrontation during a choice ceremony was apparently rare and considered extremely poor form, almost as offensive as the original situation it was meant to resolve. Korath, the queen's advisor, stepped forward as if to intervene and restore proper protocol. But Lady Serath wasn't finished. She turned to face Liam directly, stepping closer in a way that was probably meant to be intimidating. Her bioluminescent patterns shifted to colors that Liam's limited knowledge suggested indicated jealous possession mixed with direct challenge. I have been patient with this charade. I have allowed these others to present their inferior claims out of respect for tradition and ceremony. But let us speak with clarity. I am the only real choice. The only option that makes sense by any rational measure. Select me now and end this foolishness, or face consequences you may not fully understand regarding your position in our society and your ability to continue your work here. It was a threat, thinly veiled as advice for his own benefit. The chamber fell into profound silence, even more absolute than before. Every eye was on Liam, watching to see how the human would respond to this breach of protocol, this implicit coercion, this jealous demand for recognition as the obvious and inevitable choice. The queen herself leaned forward slightly, her expression unreadable but her attention absolutely focused. Liam felt something shift inside himself. He'd been prepared to navigate this diplomatically, to try to choose based on political calculation and minimal harm. But Serath's aggressive confrontation and barely veiled threat had clarified something important. Trying to please everyone or choose the politically safest option would be fundamentally dishonest. And dishonesty in this context would ultimately harm everyone more than uncomfortable truth. He took a slow breath and made a decision. He would speak honestly, regardless of consequences. Lady Serath, Liam said clearly, his voice carrying across the silent chamber with more authority than he usually projected, please step back to your formal position. You have violated the ceremony's established protocols, and I need to respond to all 5 bond claims properly before making any choice declaration. Serath's patterns flashed through rapid color changes, indicating shock and mounting anger. I will not be lectured about protocol buy-in. Step back, Liam interrupted firmly but without hostility. Or this ceremony ends immediately without any choice being made, and I formally request immediate return to Earth and termination of the cultural exchange program. It was partly a bluff. Liam wasn't entirely certain he had authority to make such a demand unilaterally, but the certainty in his voice and the directness of his statement made Serath hesitate. The Queen's advisor Korath was nodding slightly, apparently prepared to support Liam's position if needed. After a tense moment where the outcome seemed genuinely uncertain, Serath stepped back to her original position, though her patterns continued showing barely suppressed rage and humiliation at being corrected publicly by the one she'd expected to choose her. Liam took another breath, feeling his heart hammering but his mind clearing with the decision to speak honestly rather than diplomatically. I need to say something that may not fit neatly into your cultural frameworks or ceremony traditions, he said, addressing not just the 5 women but the broader audience of witnesses. But it's the truth, and you all deserve honesty rather than political calculation or comfortable lies. He paused, making sure he had everyone's attention. When I came to your world 6 months ago, it was as a cultural researcher and academic observer, not as someone seeking a bond partner. My presence at courtship ceremonies was professional documentation, not personal participation. My questions about bonding practices were scholarly inquiry, not romantic interest. I should have been clearer about this from the very beginning. That's my failure, and I apologize sincerely for the confusion my lack of clarity created. Several of the watching nobles showed patterns indicating surprise or reconsideration. Apparently Liam's direct acknowledgement of miscommunication was unexpected. However, Liam continued, I've been told repeatedly over the past weeks that refusing to participate in this choice ceremony would be grave insult to all the women who have expressed interest and their families, and would significantly damage diplomatic relations between our species. So I've struggled, genuinely struggled, trying to figure out how to make a choice I don't actually want to make. He looked at each woman in turn as he spoke. I've tried to calculate which option would cause least harm, which political alliance would be most beneficial, which of you might be least hurt by being selected for pragmatic reasons rather than genuine romantic feeling. I've lost sleep trying to find some path through this situation that would satisfy cultural expectations, while not being fundamentally dishonest about my own feelings and intentions. He turned his attention specifically to Lady Serath. Lady Serath, you are correct that you represent significant political advantage. You are beautiful and accomplished by your culture's standards. Your family holds real power, and choosing you would create valuable alliances. But you have also been controlling and dismissive of the other claimants throughout this process. You've used your status to try to intimidate them into withdrawal. And just now, you openly violated ceremony protocol to try to coerce my choice through threats about my position and work here. His voice remained calm but firm. I would never choose to bond with someone who treats partnership as a prize to be claimed through dominance, who views other people as obstacles to be removed, and who responds to uncertainty by trying to force outcomes through threats. Those are not qualities I value in any relationship, romantic or otherwise. Serath's patterns had gone almost completely dark, a display that Liam's research suggested indicated profound humiliation or shame in Valestrian culture. Thesha, Liam turned to the military officer, I respect you greatly. Our conversations have been meaningful, and I genuinely value your perspective on duty, honor, and the weight of representation. But mutual respect and compatible sense of responsibility aren't the same as the kind of deeper connection that should form the basis of permanent bonding. You deserve someone who feels more than professional admiration for your character. You deserve genuine romantic partnership, not merely compatible duty. Thesha's patterns showed what might have been relief mixed with acknowledgement, as if she'd suspected this, but needed to hear it said clearly. Velara, I share your intellectual curiosity and your interest in cross-species research. I think we could collaborate very productively on academic projects, but you've approached this bond claim primarily as a research opportunity rather than as personal relationship. That's honest, and I appreciate the clarity. But scholarly collaboration isn't sufficient foundation for the kind of intimate partnership that bonding represents. Neither of us would be truly happy or fulfilled in that arrangement. Velara's patterns shifted to colors suggesting thoughtful processing rather than offense. Apparently, she was already reconsidering her approach. Catherine, your pragmatism is refreshing after weeks of navigating implicit social signaling. I appreciate that you've been direct about the mutual advantages you see in a bond between us. But building a life partnership purely on commercial benefit and trade advantages seems hollow to both of us. Neither of us would find real happiness or satisfaction in a relationship that's essentially a business contract. You deserve genuine partnership, not merely profitable arrangement. Catherine's patterns showed calculation, as if she was assessing whether this rejection somehow served her interests better than acceptance would have. Nissa, Liam's voice softened slightly, you are kind and your feelings seem genuine. But I think you've fallen in love with an idea of what I represent, the exotic human, the outsider who's different from what you're accustomed to, rather than with who I actually am as a person. You've built an image of me that isn't entirely real. That's not a solid foundation for the kind of bond you're hoping for. You deserve someone who loves you for who you actually are, not for what you represent or symbolize. The chamber remained absolutely silent, everyone processing what Liam was saying. This was clearly not how choice ceremonies typically proceeded. The ceremonial advisor looked uncertain about how to handle this departure from established protocol. So here is my honest choice, Liam said clearly, his voice carrying conviction. I choose none of you for bonding. The silence broke into shocked murmurs and gasps. Several nobles showed patterns indicating they thought they'd misheard or misunderstood. Korath stepped forward quickly. That is not a valid option within the ceremony framework. Let me finish, Liam said firmly. I choose none of you for bonding because bonding, permanent partnership, should be based on genuine connection, mutual romantic feeling, and honest desire for shared life together. None of those essential elements are present between me and any of you. Creating a bond without those foundations would be fundamentally unfair to all of us involved. He addressed the broader audience now, making his case not just to the 5 women but to the witnessing nobles and the queen herself. I understand this may be considered insulting in your culture. I understand there may be diplomatic consequences. But I will not lie about feelings I don't have or commit to a bond that would be dishonest from the very beginning. If that damages diplomatic relations, then perhaps those relations were built on misunderstanding and miscommunication from the start, and this crisis was inevitable. The chamber erupted into confused conversation as nobles and advisors tried to process what Liam had just done. The queen raised one hand, and silence fell immediately. Apparently her authority overrode even shocked reaction to unprecedented social situation. The human has spoken with unusual directness, the queen said, her patterns showing colors that were difficult for Liam to interpret but which seemed to indicate serious contemplation rather than immediate anger. This is not how choice ceremonies traditionally conclude, but perhaps tradition does not account for all possible circumstances. She stood from her elevated seat and descended to the ceremonial floor, a gesture that apparently carried significant meaning based on the renewed gasps from the audience. The queen approached Liam, studying him with an intensity that made him deeply uncomfortable but which he forced himself to meet steadily. "You have rejected all 5 claimants," she said, stating the obvious for the formal record. "You have acknowledged potential diplomatic consequences. You have explained your reasoning with clarity that challenges our cultural frameworks. Now I will ask you directly. Do you believe bonding should only occur when both parties feel genuine romantic connection?" "Yes, Your Majesty," Liam said without hesitation. "In human culture, forming a permanent partnership without mutual affection is considered tragic, I suppose. A waste of both people's lives and potential for real happiness. We have stories and cautionary tales about relationships built on obligation or political calculation rather than genuine feeling. They rarely end well. And you believe this principle applies even when cultural expectations and political considerations suggest otherwise." "I believe this principle applies especially in those circumstances, Your Majesty, because the pressure to ignore genuine feeling in favor of obligation is when people most need to remember what actually creates lasting, meaningful partnerships." The queen's patterns shifted to configurations that might have indicated approval, or perhaps merely recognition of a perspective she'd not previously considered seriously. She turned to address the 5 women who had made bond claims. "Lady Serath, you violated ceremony protocol in attempt to coerce choice through status and implied threats. This was inappropriate regardless of the human's eventual decision. You are censured formally for that breach." Serath's patterns went even darker, if that was possible. The public censure was apparently significant humiliation. "Thesha, Velara, Kasrin, Nissa, you conducted yourselves appropriately throughout. The human's rejection reflects his own feelings and circumstances, not failure or inadequacy on your parts. You are released from the ceremony with honor intact." The queen returned her attention to Liam. "You have created unprecedented situation, but you have done so with reasoning that, while foreign to our traditions, carries its own internal consistency and integrity." She paused. "I am going to issue formal decree that your presence at courtship ceremonies was professional rather than personal, that you are not available for bond consideration, and that any future bond claims directed toward you will be considered void and without standing." Relief flooded through Liam so intensely he felt slightly lightheaded. "Thank you, Your Majesty." "Do not thank me yet," she said with what might have been dry amusement. "You have disrupted significant political expectations and wounded several families' pride. There will be consequences to navigate, though not the ones you feared. You may continue your research here, but under explicit understanding that you are observer, not participant. Can you accept those terms? Yes, Your Majesty, absolutely. Then let it be recorded. The choice ceremony has concluded with no bond formed. The human Liam Thorne is recognized as cultural researcher operating in professional capacity only. All bond claims are dissolved with this decree. The formal ceremony ended, though the social aftermath was complicated. Liam spent the next several days in meetings with various officials and family representatives, trying to smooth over the disruption his rejection had caused. Serath, the Queen's advisor, met with him privately to discuss the situation. You took a significant risk. If the Queen had decided your rejection was unacceptable insult, you could have been expelled or worse. I know, but I couldn't lie about something so fundamental. The consequences of forming a bond under false pretenses would have been worse in the long term. Perhaps, the Queen seems to believe so at least. Serath's patterns showed thoughtful consideration. You have taught us something, whether we wanted the lesson or not. That genuine feeling cannot be manufactured through social pressure or political calculation. That honesty about emotions, even uncomfortable honesty, has value we don't always recognize. Over the following weeks, Liam gradually resumed his research under the new protocols that made his status explicitly clear. Most Valestrians seemed relieved by the clarity. The ambiguity had apparently been uncomfortable for everyone involved. Thesha sought him out about 3 weeks after the ceremony, requesting private conversation. I wanted to thank you, she said directly, as was her nature, for rejecting you publicly. Liam asked with a slight smile. For being honest about it, she corrected. I had convinced myself that bonding with you was what I wanted. The political alliance seemed logical. We had compatible values. It made sense strategically. But truthfully, I was more interested in the alliance than in you as a person. Your rejection forced me to acknowledge that, and it's freed me to pursue genuine connections based on actual feeling rather than strategic calculation. I'm glad it worked out for you, Liam said sincerely. Valara had similar response when they encountered each other at an academic conference. Your honesty was clarifying. I had been approaching the bond claim as primarily research opportunity, which you correctly identified as insufficient foundation for actual partnership. I've redirected that energy into academic collaboration proposals instead, which is more appropriate to our actual relationship. We should discuss joint research projects if you're interested. Even Catherine, the pragmatic merchant's daughter, acknowledged during a chance meeting. Your rejection was correct. Neither of us would have been happy in a bond built purely on commercial advantage. I'm pursuing other alliances now, with clearer understanding of what I'm actually seeking. Nissa took longer to approach him, but eventually requested conversation. I was angry with you for weeks, she admitted. But I've thought about what you said, that I was in love with an idea of you rather than with who you actually are. That was painful to hear, but it was true. I'm trying to be more realistic and honest with myself about my romantic interests now. Lady Serath never spoke to him again. The humiliation of public rejection combined with formal censure for her protocol violation had apparently damaged her social standing significantly. Liam regretted the pain he'd caused her, but he didn't regret the honesty that had necessitated it. Months later, preparing his final research report before returning to Earth, Liam reflected on what the experience had taught him. That choice made with genuine honesty and respect for what relationships should be, even when that choice challenged cultural expectations and disrupted political plans, ultimately served everyone better than choice made from obligation or fear. That the courage to say, this doesn't feel right, even though it's expected, had value that transcended diplomatic convenience or social comfort. That jealousy and possessiveness were ultimately poor foundations for partnership, regardless of culture or species. And that genuine connection couldn't be forced through ceremony, social pressure, or political calculation. Attempting to do so ultimately failed everyone involved. He'd stood in a ceremonial chamber facing 5 women who expected him to choose one of them. The most jealous and powerful among them had stepped forward to essentially demand his selection through status and threats. The others had fallen silent, sensing that the moment would determine more than just one bond decision. And he'd revealed his choice, or rather, his non-choice, with the only thing he could offer honestly: respect for what bonding should mean, and refusal to diminish it through pretense or obligation. It had been uncomfortable. It had caused diplomatic tension and wounded pride. It had hurt feelings and challenged assumptions about how these situations should be resolved. But it had also been right. And in the long term, even the Valestrians who'd been shocked or offended by his directness came to respect the integrity of choosing honesty over convenience, genuine feeling over political calculation. The jealous woman had stepped forward. The others had fallen silent, and the human had revealed his choice: to honor truth and respect what partnership should mean, rather than accepting what cultural pressure and political expectation demanded. Sometimes, Liam had learned, the most courageous choice was the honest one, even when honesty disrupted everything and pleased no